Book TV attends numerous book fairs and festivals every year to speak with nonfiction authors. Recently, we visited the National Press Club's book fair in Washington, D.C., and talked to Anne Rosen about her late father John Herbert's work as a journalist covering the civil rights movement.
Anne Rosen is a journalism professor at the University of Maryland. She's also the co-author of Deep South Dispatch, memoir of a civil rights journalist. Anne, who was John Herbert besides your father?
Well, he was quite a prominent journalist. He worked in the South for more than a decade covering the civil rights movement for both the New York Times and UPI. But then he moved to Washington, D.C. and was the White House reporter for the New York Times, covered politics and government, some of the major stories in the country. He died last year, but we were able to complete his memoir before he died. The memoir only covers the civil rights period, unfortunately. That's as far as we got. But even in that time period, he was like the Forrest Gump of journalism. He was at Selma, he was in Birmingham, Alabama, he was in Philadelphia, Mississippi, he covered the Emmett Till trial, he was with Martin Luther King on many of his economic campaigns. So he was quite the journalist who was everywhere at the right time at the right place.
What was the reaction your dad would receive down south when he was reporting?
Not good. He started working there in 1949 when coverage of black issues was not popular at all, and he suffered a lot of pushback from both friends and the status quo in Mississippi at the time. But he continued to write stories that were relevant and finally became major national stories.
You mentioned several seminal moments in the civil rights movement. How were they covered at the time, and what kind of access did your father have?
Well, it was interesting because there were, at first, a lot of the subscribers to his stories, the television stations or the newspapers, did not want the stories that he was writing. But as the movement began to grow, the subscribers and the readers realized this was a story of significance. When he works for the New York Times, he had nothing but complete support from his publisher and the editors to cover this story. And the UPI also was good about wanting to cover the stories. The only real pushback he had were actually from the people in the South, the whites, status quo, who did not want things to change in America.
Would a reporter like your father be embedded in SNCC or any other movements at the time?
I'm sorry?
Would a reporter like your father, would he be embedded in organizations like SNCC or any other civil rights movement organizations at the time? Or was he reporting traditionally from the outside?
No, he was traditionally from the outside. This book, Deep South Dispatch, really is almost a code for journalism as well, because it really tells how an objective journalist who just tells the story, both sides, was able to have enough credibility that his story was relevant to the nation.
What was your father's process like?
Well, it was interesting because he didn't have cell phones or modern technology to help him out. He describes in the book how he had to find pay phones, how difficult that was, especially as he was traveling through the South. And then he just drove and took planes all over the South to get there with a reporter's notebook, and faced a lot of danger doing that. These were very violent times. His life was threatened on many occasions. He took us with him when I was a child. He would take us on assignment. So my family was run out of St. Augustine, Florida in the middle of the night. I went to Ku Klux Klan marches with him that he was covering as a reporter. So it was an interesting upbringing as a child to have a first-hand exposure to the civil rights movement.
You talk about your father's process and how antiquated it must seem now. We're standing here at the National Press Club 2018, the great democratization of journalism with the internet and social media. What was your father's thoughts on that as he was eyeing the end of his life?
Well, he was fascinated with the new technology, and he often commented about how much easier it would have been for him to be able to do the reporting he did. But it's interesting how so many things have changed in technology for journalists and for civil rights in America, but so many things in the book still resonate today. Just the gumshoe reporting techniques that he used, and then also many of the atrocities he witnessed in the civil rights movement. Some of those resonate today. So the book is very relevant to today's America.
Anne Rosen, she's a co-author with her late father John Herbers of his memoir, Deep South Dispatch, memoir of a civil rights journalist. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Keep an eye out for more interviews from the National Press Club's Book Fair to air in the near future. You can also watch them and any of our programs in their entirety at booktv.org. Type the author's name in the search bar at the top of the page.